In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. Can I just say how wonderful this is? It is so wonderful to see you all. And after 15, 16 months of trying to recognize everybody in masks, now I have to identify you by different seats. Wish me luck. One thing that I really like to do when preaching is to use a character or a story from a film to help illustrate the story. It doesn't have to be a movie about the gospel. In fact, most aren't. But I especially love to get really good art house movies or award-winning Oscar nominees. So, movies that you should see. I like to integrate those into my homilies as much as possible. But this is summertime, and I have young kids, and so the movie I want to talk about today is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Has anybody seen this? Have you seen it? No, okay, it's from one of the Marvel movies. It's big action. And it's about superheroes, but it's about shrinking superheroes. And I'll have to find another sermon to talk about the Wasp. Mostly I want to talk about what happens to Ant-Man and the characters who are in a very special building, which is a laboratory. In this building, in this lab, there is a portal that takes them to another dimension. And through that dimension, you have access to knowledge and to technology and lots of things that you might want to have. So it's a desirable thing to have. But because it's a movie, to make it interesting, there's someone who, the scientist who built the lab and this portal sent his wife into the portal 20 years ago, which probably wasn't a good idea because she hasn't come back yet. And everything that they need, both the technology, the knowledge, but also this relationship that he values is all there and has access to it through this portal that is in the building. Very different from the gospel today. So I'm telling a different story, at least to start off with. Because this is a movie about shrinking superheroes, the way that they protect the lab is by shrinking it down. It's about a 10-story gray building. And they shrink it down to it's a suitcase size. And they think that by doing this, they'll keep it safe. But what happens? Because it's an action movie, the bad guys find out about it. So suddenly there's car chases, there's action sequences as this lab that had been a big stationary building gets thrown from person to person. The good guys have it, the bad guys have it, and then, of course, the good guys get it back. They get access to the portal. The scientist's wife, who had been gone for 20 years, cover your ears if you're going to go see this later, because here comes a spoiler alert. They find her, they bring her back, and they all live happily ever after. Right. Until the next sequel. But they don't really live the way that they did before. Because once your lab has been shrunk down and you've seen it move all around and you have to find a way to get it back, you really never stop thinking that it could move again. Their lives, even though everything was back in place, their lives had suddenly become a lot more contingent. And that meant uncertainty, but I think it also meant that they grew, they matured, and in fact, what became most important really lifted up to the surface. And they suddenly understood what was truly valuable. For this first Sunday back, we have an almost perfect text to be using. And I'm not actually talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp. It was a fun movie, I'll give it that. Rather, I want to think about the Old Testament passage this morning, where David leads a parade of thousands as the Ark of the Covenant, that symbol that God is there in the midst of them. And in fact, it wasn't a symbol at all. This was the home, this was the house of God, that they were now moving from one place, the house of Abinadab, to another place entirely, to the tent that David had built for it. This was a story about a homecoming. Though it wasn't exactly the mansion that we might have envisioned for the very presence of God, rather it was a tent. So even there, even in this final arrival place, there is a sense of impermanence, a sense of contingency. And yet, the celebration is as robust as it would be otherwise. In fact, the celebration happens on the parade. The whole time that they're moving, I think that parade itself that we hear about, that is what sounds to me like a cathedral. Not the location that the ark is taken to, not the perfectly built sanctuary, but rather this procession that happens with thousands strong, singing and dancing. The action isn't about the one place, but rather it's about following the sacred vessel from one place to the next and knowing that God is there in the midst of them, knowing that their very celebration, their companionship, their songs, their slow pace to remember and give thanks, that is what created the holy space that we might think of as a church or even a cathedral. It's almost a story of a cathedral on wheels, which kind of makes me wonder if that isn't the way that cathedrals are supposed to be anyway. Notice that the people of God don't wait until they arrive to start the service, right? This isn't about the schlep and then the service. They don't get there, they don't march quietly, and then they get there and they say, all right, now we've arrived, please take out your prayer books to the service for the installation of the ark and sing along. Rather, the worship and the celebration that the knowledge that they were in the presence of God, that was happening all along as they moved from one point to another. And this was a grand procession, thousands of strong, glorious vestments, songs, harps, timbrels, castanets. I didn't expect that one. Castanets, tambourines, anything you need to make a joyful noise to God. And they took the slow road. Did you notice that at one point on the journey, they stopped? They stopped every 6 paces to give thanks. Every 6 paces to sacrifice an ox and a fatling. It was the procession, it was the parade itself that was the cathedral. And not entirely because the ark was there in the midst of them, but rather what made it the sacred space, what made it a cathedral was their music and their song, their delight in God, their gratitude, and their movement not on their time, but on God's time. Now, in this time apart, we have learned so much about ourselves, about our community, about our nation, about our neighbors. We've learned about our faith. We've learned oftentimes just through the sheer heartache of it all, what matters most to us, what we hold on to, and what we know are gifts from God. And I know that one thing that I have learned, and I've learned this from each of you in what you've said to me as we've gone through this, together but apart. One thing that I've heard is how much we have missed this place. And for good reason. This, in the words of Bishop Leonard, who built this space, a parable in stone. And what does it want to teach us today? It's something new every Sunday, every time we come in. It's something new for each and every one of us. What did the stained glass, what does the music, what does the story that each of you brings today, each story that has come through this space, through the decades, what story gets into the stone and is now part of the parable? This place matters. This sanctuary matters. And our time apart, I think, has made that very clear. And you know, this place matters because of where we are. If we could do the same thing with that lab and shrink it down and carry it out the door and take it to any number of wonderful, lovely places, would it be quite the same place? It wouldn't. Not without the sound of the buses going forward, not without the knowledge of this city and this neighborhood, of how it has changed and how we continue to be a part of that. And this place matters because it points to another place entirely that is not another place entirely. And that is the realm of God. The heavenly places that speak of God's eternity and of our ultimate destination. As we read the story of David, carrying the ark with the thousands of people alongside, moving it into the tent, as we read that passage, as people returning to the tent ourselves, we can see some contours of meaning that are the same for us as David learned in that time. God is in the temple, God is in the city, and God is in the heavens. Living faithfully means seeing and experiencing all three. We come to the temple to meet God, but also to see how God is present in the city, in the community, as well as in the heavens. And each of these three is vital to who we are. Each of these three tells us something about how God is in the world and how we're called to live out that faith in connection with one another and in song and dance. We see that we've been in this procession, this parade for many months. And if we're being faithful, we know we'll be getting back into that procession again soon. But rather than leaving the cathedral, it means taking it with us. Each time we leave the building, each time we leave the space, to realize that the temple of God is larger than this, that God is all around, that we bring the gifts out. And that then when we return soon after as the procession continues. I cannot tell you how wonderful it is to be back and to be back together, though we know that this is incomplete. We can't all be here together yet. We know that. Yet as we begin to return, to cautiously enter the tent, perhaps that incompleteness can be a reminder that we have continued amidst uncertainty and incomplete times. We have continued to be the people of God. We've continued to sing and dance as the cathedral has had to be on wheels for a little while. And now we're returning. Not ending the procession as we arrive home, but rather beginning it again as we journey together into the heart of God.